Hello and welcome to another episode of Planet Outlook. On this episode, to talk about wildlife conservation, especially species in peril, we have Dr. Karthikeyan Vasudevan, who is the scientist in charge of LACONS, which expands into the Laboratory for the Conservation of Endangered Species at the Center of Cellular and Molecular Biology at Hyderabad. Thank you, Dr. Vasudevan, for joining us at Planet Outlook.
Thank you, Ananda.
So recently, the Honorable Vice President Sri Venkaiah Naidu visited LACONS and praised LACONS for developing several biotechnology tools for wildlife conservation. So he also actually mentioned climate change and the importance of protecting our natural heritage and ecosystems. So if you can expand on that.
Okay. Yeah, it was an honor to have the Vice President visit us. As you know, he told us that he's on a pilgrimage of sorts to just learn what is happening in the country, what new developments are happening. And he was very curious about the work that we are doing. And LACONS, by the expansion the name that you just read out, is an institution that is committed to providing support to conservation. So, since we are funded through the CSIR, we have a mandate to provide support to zoos, to all the agencies that are engaged with conservation of endangered species. So, we want to network with all the agencies and first understand what are the gaps, where are the needs, and then try to address those needs. And if we have some technology gaps, we want to address them. And there are many institutions in the country trying to implement, support conservation. I think a lot of biotechnology can help in conservation efforts, because if you might see the developments that have happened with agriculture and with animal production, we have made huge strides. We have become self-sufficient in food production. We have achieved self-sufficiency in dairy, and we have achieved some success with poultry. So all this has not happened overnight. It has happened over several years of research inputs in addressing a single issue of improving production. So similarly, if we focus on improving conservation, we might have the same successes coming out if we make that investment today. So that was the overarching goal and purpose of this lab. And his visit, during his visit, he saw our facilities, and he also launched a book which was published by the Central Zoo Authority. And this document basically highlights the importance of biobanking. And just to give you a brief for the audience who might be interested in knowing what biobanking is, we almost on a daily basis, you have some individual of an endangered species dying in the zoo. And birth is very difficult to achieve, live birth, but deaths do happen because of old age, any ailment, all those problems that any normal living thing faces. So when we have such unfortunate incidents happening, not just in zoos, anywhere, animals die out on accidents. So we can very safely ensure that the genetic material of the animal is rescued and saved. And this becomes very important because in future, you might have our protected areas far more disconnected than what it is today. And we are talking about the linkages today, and they exist in the field, but they may not exist in the future. and populations will get more and more isolated, more and more inbred, and we need to infuse them with some, genetic material which is different from what they are procreating in their own areas. So the ill effects of inbreeding. Very quickly it can set in, and it might be very difficult to bring out species from inbreeding. A typical example is the cheetah. Globally, it is highly inbred, basically because of a bottleneck event which just pushed the population to very few individuals, and they are almost related to each other now. So that will become a very huge challenge for us. So at every stage, we have to see how we can make conservation easier and effective. So this booklet is primarily highlighting the role of zoos and the role of agencies like us to participate and work together to be able to save the genetic diversity that exists with wild animals. And this is not just genetic material. These are actual live tissues like gonads, testes or oocytes of animals. And then we preserve them in minus 196, and we are able to revive them. And we can also have embryos out of them. So live animals can be produced. So it's not very far from now when we will require help of these technologies. If not, it is required already for some of the endangered species. So he highlighted the importance of this, and he also interacted with faculty members. We interacted with students. Students made presentations of posters. He was very happy to see a diversity of students in the laboratory, almost representing different states of the country. So he was very happy with that sort of an atmosphere that we were able to maintain here.
So mentioning about challenges, one of also key challenge is the shrinking habitats. And as we speak, we are in the era of the sixth mass extinction of species, where several reports have pointed out that around 70% there is a population drop of species, around 70%. So how challenging, and what do you think on this? Because science can help up to a certain point, but then you need habitats, you need spaces, we need to share spaces with the other species.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing is, we have to step in at every stage. If keeping species or populations of species abundant itself is a big issue. And we cannot be complacent that there are many in number. We are talking about leopards, for instance, and usually they say they are very abundant. I mean, we don't have to really bother about them. If we take, say, nilgai, we say, it's abundant. I say black bug, it's plenty. But if you see let's take these three populations. So-called perceptionally abundant. But leopards are getting hammered a lot. They are getting into conflict. They are being snared. They are also into trade. They are going in the garb of tiger parts, and the fact is that the protected areas where we iconically treat tigers and other co-predators as very important focal organisms, leopard populations are very low in tiger reserves. Generally they are dispersed cats. They are not concentrated cats, and they don't have as much social interaction, or they cannot survive in high densities. So there are some exceptions. I mean, there is a place somewhere in Rajasthan, I heard that this is, but probably artificially managed in a way that they can, exist in such high densities. So anything can trigger a decline, a rapid decline, like systematic operation of hunting. And if a group goes and tries to eliminate leopards from an area, it's not very difficult to do it. And the second issue is that it doesn't get the required support of the people, because unfortunately it gets into direct conflict with the people, their livelihoods, their lives. So it injures people or it kills their livestock. So it doesn't enjoy the privilege of a good, attractive, beautiful species, and which is not harmful. So such species will lose out over time, because it will not capture the imagination of the policymakers that there could be dangers to the species and it could be completely removed. So the other two examples that I took are of ungulates. Black buck, we say they are abundant, but you see them in large numbers primarily because they congregate to breed. And that should not be confused to their habitat requirement. Their habitat requirement can go beyond the space that they congregate to breed. So when people take pictures of thousands of black buck in one area, that is the time when they breed. So they will not occur in such high numbers throughout the year, and they need to use large areas to forage and require habitats that are suitable for this. And we don't have such habitats anymore. And if they go into agricultural field, obviously any farmer would not like a black buck to graze on their crops. So they will try to chase them. And if they don't have black bucks, it doesn't matter to them as farmers. But this is where the conservation goals kick in. We have to operate at that level where we can understand the biology of the species and make interventions which are meaningful for the species. And for black buck, the entire range looks like half of India, but they are all in pockets. There is absolutely no movement between them. And they are stuck in their corners, and there's no interaction of black bucks in the entire range. And they also symbolize how we have neglected dry grasslands. Grasslands are heavily encroached for agriculture, and with fossil water being mined from the ground, any place can become agriculturally viable. Even the driest parts of the country can today become agriculturally viable. So we have to visualize the threats in this fashion. And the third species is nilgai. It almost co-occurs with humans. And there is a lot of disease exchange that can happen from livestock to nilgai, because they are roughly overlap completely with in terms of habitat requirements. They live in degraded forests. And when I say degraded, they didn't evolve to live in degraded forests. They live in these mosaic habitats, and they live in open forests. And there is usually in forestry parlance, open forests are alluded to degraded forests. Now, that's not true. There is a lot of savanna grasslands, which again are highly threatened. They were naturally occurring everywhere in the country. And so we are going to have problems with such species, which come completely overlapping with human requirements. So I think these are examples, I would say, that we cannot be complacent with any species. In fact, we need to kick in when we say that it is near threatened. And if it is data deficient, try to find out more and evaluate it internally and put them into some level of IUCN categories. So we have a huge number of data deficient species. We have a huge number of near threatened species. We have a huge number of vulnerable species. So we are focusing on the critically endangered species. I would, the policies should be tuned in a manner to address the near threatened species, and then not allow them to go into the next category. Because if we pile up at the critically endangered end, we will not have much success. We will lose out. Even a few critically endangered species can be such a huge burden for a country like India. Economic, social, cultural, we cannot achieve it. So, and once we don't achieve it, it kind of gives a negative feedback that we have failed and we have not done much and stuff like that. So I think we should not be shy in showing successes of protecting the most common species. We should be very, very careful in making any investments and support to conservation at these stages.
So there are two things which comes out from your comments. One is the disease exchange. I know Lacan specializes in animal disease and ecology. So for the viewers, if you can basically explain what's happening on that front. And also the critically endangered part and the vulnerable, as you had rightly mentioned. But we as the Ministry of Environment and Forest has now kind of listed a number of species which comes under now the species recovery program. How do you think that's going to work out?
The first part of your question was about the disease exchange. See, today in the planet, probably the most common mammal that you will find is the human being, right? So many pathogens, when they evolve on hosts, they become pathogenic. That's a property of the pathogen, and the pathogen needs the host. If otherwise, the pathogen ceases to exist. So pathogens evolve on hosts. So when the hosts become problematic, or they have some strategy to counter the pathogen also counters it with its own strategies. So one of the strategies could be, can I jump to another host? Can I find another suitable host? Right? So it can happen that many of our human pathogens can shift to animals, and from animals, because we have a lot of domesticated animals, goats, pigs, chicken, and cows. And so we have a huge, the enterprise of the human civilization is not just restricted to our lives. We get into the animal lives as well. So when they are not stall-fed and they are moving in the pastures, they can shed viruses, bacteria, fungi, which are pathogenic. And the same areas are used by wild animals. So either a wild animal can occupy the same area and the spores or the pathogens can get transmitted to them as reservoir hosts or as other suitable hosts. And when they die, we may never know what is the reason. And when we with great difficulty we are able to identify pathogens in humans and in livestock. Imagine a wild animal. If it dies somewhere far away, how do you go and find out? How do you even detect? And the pathogens can spread very fast. And by the time we kick in and we start to generate responses, it might be too late. That's my concern with these pathogens and wildlife. And we have had several examples of how pathogens have devastated wild animal populations. And every time we have stepped in late. And we have only witnessed we have only stepped in after the catastrophic decline. So we have not, I wouldn't say that we are well equipped or well aware of the consequences of new pathogen emergence in wild animals. I think it's very important to invest in this area because we share the same space as these animals. So we cannot be, very sure that these pathogens do not return back to us and cause problems to humans. So we have to be very, very careful. And the second aspect of your question was on the MOEF and CC's listing of prioritized species for recovery programs. We have a tendency to look at recovery programs on flagship species. Maybe it has very important gains because we can protect habitats and also the species. And flagships have always served as a great tool to advocate new protected areas to be formed or areas to be consolidated. But at this point in time, we are at a situation we can't even add a square inch of area into the protected area network without being contended or asked questions about why and why this should be made. Or the era of fast growth in protected areas in the past, we have moved to a era where every new addition is going to be very strongly contested by various organizations, agencies, even people. So in that scenario, I would tend to move toward a non-flagship species and choose species where we can probably have a focused program of research implementation, research tied to implementation, and zoos become a big partner in this. Our zoos are not just showcases in a drawing room of a person to just show what they collected over a period of time. So it has to be something driven with purpose. And I hope the recovery programs also take into consideration the species that are listed under the conservation breeding program of the Central Zoo Authority, because they are all within the same ministry. So there has to be a harmony of these lists. We cannot be one conflicting the other. In fact, one can support each other and make it stronger and easily implemented.
You have been a part of the mouse deer recovery program, species most of us will never see in its natural habitat. It's such an elusive creature. So tell us about that story.
See, I am only a small factor in the whole process. The reason why I say I'm only a small factor is because it was a prioritized species for conservation breeding. Rightly so, because we had no idea about this ungulate, and there were pressures on the habitat because of grazing, fire, and also hunting. It's a very easy species to hunt once you know its behavior. Those who go regularly hunting or have seen this animal, it just freezes. It doesn't run like any other deer. And in fact, many people who hunt them just catch them, by hand or throw a bag and catch them. So they just freeze the animal and then they catch them. So they don't set snares or, unlike other mammals. And it is, the mouse deer itself is endemic to India. I mean, the region where our country is defined, we have protected areas which have them. So the populations are there and secure populations are there. But it is a ancient deer. It signifies our landmass. I mean, how our flora and fauna have evolved over time and why we have this kind of wonderful diversity in the country. This kind of epitomizes it. It has survived several events, over billions of years. You find fossil mouse deer bones in many places. So, which means like the sambar was a European deer. In fact, it came into India from crossing the Himalayan peaks, and it is now everywhere. And we call it our species. But this is something that existed in the Indian landmass for much longer than many of the other deers. The antelopes obviously moved in from Africa, and they occupied much of the landmass. So it's very unique, evolutionarily very distinct. And the third thing is that it has a potential to breed that we don't even understand. It can quickly increase in population if you give the right, inputs in the conservation breeding program. So Hyderabad Zoo is the focal zoo that started this, and Lacons, much before I stepped into this place, I came here in 2013. So much before that, a lot of scientists had done work on the mouse deer reproduction. So there was a clear demonstration of how the population can be properly managed through scientific inputs and increased to an extent that the population is now ready to go back into the world. So from 7 individuals, it went to 215 in Hyderabad over a span of about 10 years. And immediately the tendency for the zoo was, what do we do with these animals? We don't know what to do. And they were exchanging animals for other animals with other zoos. So that is where I could play a role in helping the department prepare a reintroduction plan. And when we started off with the reintroduction plan, we don't have any reintroduction plans for deers in the country. So we started off from a clean slate. Which also sets the tone for what we can do with other species, other ungulates. And ungulates form a very important, biomass of, regulators. They eat the vegetation, also provide food for the next trophic level, that is the carnivores. So this action plan was very, very crucial, and the responsibility was given to me. So I prepared it, and we had a lot of deliberation on how to implement it, how to go about it. And since 2019, we have been regularly, introducing them into different areas. In Telangana, at least 3 areas we have identified, and I have been to all the 3. I have seen some problems, I have highlighted it. They have made corrective measures. Some places it has been very successful. There are some teething problems in different places. But this is a clear example of how research and conservation breeding can really give good results. And I think at different stages, the inputs provided help them increase the population. And similarly, when they wanted to reintroduce how to decide what size, how to habituate, and all that, we could provide them inputs. And I think this is where I think we need to work together, synergize our expertise and knowledge to achieve conservation of a species like the mouse deer.
Before I let you go, Dr. Vasudevan, I wanted to ask you about one of your most favorite landscapes, which you have been talking about for now several years, the Eastern Ghats, which has never got its due. all our focus remains on the Western Ghats and the biodiversity in the Western Ghats. But the Eastern Ghats is also a repository of endemic species. So if you can tell us that story too.
Yeah, see, the thing is, many people have pitched Eastern Ghats with Western Ghats. You cannot do that. The Eastern Ghats will lose out if you pitch against Western Ghats, because it has many iconic species, many endemic species and all that. But I think, if you look at Rogers and Powar's classification of India biogeographic zones, almost, I would say, one fourth or 1/5 of India is put in this Deccan Plateau, and there are 5A, B, C, huge area, huge part of the landmass, and has immense mineral resources, immense human capital, and a very important wildlife capital. So I think if we have lost one very enigmatic bird from this area permanently, like Jordan's corson, right? And over time, I think we have lost many species from this area. The bustard is almost on its way out. Chinkara, very few populations are left. Gaur is again pocketed. Elephants try to come in, but they don't stick on for too long. But they are also there. We had the Indian cheetah, which again roamed in these areas only, and they are also gone. So the footprint of extinction in this area is probably the highest. So, and that is where we need to step in. We should not look at the charisma of species that are surviving and doing well, even in a national park or a protected area. I think those are now secure. We have good regimes of management in many areas, and they can be replicated, and protection is there. There's a system of monitoring. But neglected areas, rivers, river ecosystems, mountain, Himalayan high mountains, and then Eastern Ghats. These are going to become a huge challenge. And before, it's very easy to forget about species that once existed in that same area. Places where you have the airstrip now in Hyderabad, there is a place where bustards were found. If you go to the local people, they will not even recognize this was an area which bustard used. So bustards were there in Telangana, many places. They are no more there. People don't bother, don't have much worries about losing it. But as conservationists, as people who know the history of the place, this is our role to highlight and tell people that this is not just a one-off issue. This might be the beginning of a big cascade of events. We should not take it very easy and ignore such signals, and we should step in and do something. So that's where I think Eastern Ghats is very close to me in terms of its future agenda, what we can do for conservation. Can we bring back some species like the Indian gaur, the wild buffalo in Chhattisgarh? Those will be huge challenges, but this is what we are supposed to be doing, right? We should not do easy things.
So quick last questions. How hopeful are you for this turnaround, if there is a turnaround?
How hopeful?
Yes, how hopeful are you?
I'm very hopeful. I'm very hopeful. The reason is that almost everyone whom I've talked to about this have felt the same, have echoed most of the concerns that I have raised, and they feel that this is very important. And over a period, this place and the species that are found here have been neglected. But we can change the perception, and we can make the right changes in the policy and actions. And I think we will be on course.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Vasudevan. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on Planet Outlook. And hopefully we shall continue this conversation in time future.
Sure.